And we're live.
Yay.
All right. Good show.
All right. See you next
That
time.
was fun. We had a nice, good conversation about legacy code. So
It was good.
we're all set.
It was really good.
Hope all of you enjoyed it.
Good night. Drive safe. Tip
Yeah,
your
drive
waitress.
safe. Tip your waitress. Yeah.
Or waiter. WPC.
Yeah. Tip your wait person,
Tip the wait staff.
the wait staff. Yeah.
This is going to be a good episode tonight.
Yep. Should be.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Because we can get this thing started.
Get it going.
Do we have a title for this one?
Do we ever have a title for any of them?
That's not a very good title.
The one we don't have a title for.
Yeah.
Just call it Legacy Code or Legacy Code Bases or
Legacy. I'll just call it legacy.
Leaving Your Legacy.
No. All right.
Whatever, dude.
Shh. Trying to get this thing started. Welcome to the Loosely Couple Podcast, episode 28. I'm your co-host, Jeff, and this is Matt. Tonight we are going to be talking about legacy, or as Matt's calling it, leaving your legacy. I don't really like that.
That's not what I called it.
Yeah, that is what you called it.
I don't think
So we're talking about legacy code bases and working with them and all that fun stuff. So, yeah. How is it going tonight, Matt?
Oh, it's going okay. That's about all I got.
It's going okay. Well, that's good. It's better than not going at all.
That's true.
Yes. Yeah.
Every day above ground is a good day, right?
That's what they tell me.
Yeah.
That's what they tell me. So for those of you who are not watching and aren't going to watch this on YouTube,
Shame on you.
Matt is wearing pink bunny ears. Can you explain the reasoning for this?
I sure can. Thank you for asking. So I'm like I teased at work because I'm like way behind the times on catching up on shows. Like within the last year, I just started watching It's Always Sunny, which has been out for like 10 years. I just started watching it. So the show that I'm on, I guess now, is Bob's Burgers. I don't know if you ever watched it, but it is freaking hilarious. And one of the characters in Bob's Burgers, Louise, who's voiced by the talented Kristen Shaw, wears this hat. And so I bought it on Amazon because I'm an adult. And I've been wearing it around to places because YOLO.
Okay. Well, I'm moderately sorry that I asked.
You probably figured you were going to be.
I'm just kidding. It's a good thing I don't work where you work because I don't watch any of those shows. I've never seen It's Always Sunny.
Oh, dude, you're missing out, man.
So
you're missing out.
Like, probably be if they're making fun of you for just now watching them, they'd probably ridicule me mercilessly.
No, if you didn't, it's worse to start watching them late than it is to not watch them at all, I think.
Okay. Well, I hear it's best if you watch them before they're cool.
I watch them like long past the point where they're cool. Like I'm like an anti-hipster. Like I watched it after it was really cool.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So thanks for asking about how my day was. It was great.
How was your day, Jeff?
Yeah. No, fantastic. No, it was an interesting day. Had a couple technology, computers things going on.
That's good.
It's frustrating sometimes.
Okay. Yeah. Computers are.
My coworker Jake Smith, Jake Smith, not the other Jake Smith.
Right.
Yeah, he was having some fun today too. He found a place where, for some reason, some float, or I think at one point arrays were being used as hash keys, and then floats are being used as hash keys. He was having some trouble with that, so it was just all around a very great day for everybody. I
think I saw his tweet about that.
Yeah, I think you probably did. So
what does that mean?
It means it was.
Just kidding.
Yeah. So that was, which I think that was kind of interesting because that brings up, the topic is, you know, this is something you will have to deal with is code that you don't understand or code that you think is terrible or code that you don't know how in the world it possibly works. That is legacy code.
Mm-hmm.
So that'd be fun to talk about that as a topic tonight.
It's more fun to talk about it than it is to work with it, right?
Yeah, for the most part. It's so I think it's like it's not a rite of passage, but it's like something that is fun to deal with because you get stories out of legacy code. Like, perfectly architected, beautiful code that, works flawlessly, handles all the errors correctly, doesn't ever get into weird states, unicorn code that doesn't actually exist, or
Right.
academic code that no one ever, really
Actually
uses.
writes or uses. Yeah.
That's no fun to talk about. Like you couldn't have an entire podcast episode where you told stories about the perfect code. I mean,
you could. It'd just be a really shitty podcast episode.
and it'd be very boring and nobody would listen to it because it would be boring.
Right.
So that's why legacy code is fun to work with because it's challenging at the time, but eventually you get out of it some lessons and you get some stories and
Or
stories
if nothing else, at least some funny comments that are left in there.
Yeah.
Like, don't touch this, don't know how it works.
Yeah.
If you touch this, it will break.
The Here Be Dragons comments.
Yes.
I don't know why this comment has to be on line 37, but it does. So don't ever move this comment or the entire world will explode. What?
Those are always fun.
Of course, those are the times when I'm like, well, I'm deleting that comment and seeing what happens.
Right. Yeah, I want to see this thing go down.
I just want to watch the world burn. Yeah. So legacy code, I've given a couple of talks that deal with, refactoring code and, testing code that's, existing. Like, how do you deal with applications that are unwieldy? And, there's other people who've given them to, like Paul Jones. And of course, Paul Jones has the entire book on modernizing legacy code bases for PHP,
Right.
which if you haven't checked that out, it actually is a really good handbook. So
Why'd you say actually?
What do you mean? Why did I say actually?
You said like I don't know. Never mind.
Surprisingly, Paul said.
Well, that's what it kind of like. No, trust me, you should read it.
That's what I'm saying. I'm saying, trust me, you should read it.
Okay.
Some people are skeptical of, reading books for this kind of stuff. So
I know.
I'm just saying, it is a good resource.
Okay.
Gosh, sorry, Paul.
I'm trying to get you in trouble with Paul. That's all.
We're plugging your book, but in a terrible way. So yeah, I've seen some very interesting things, and the best part about this whole process, I think, for me anyway, is I've also written some really terrible legacy code before.
Yeah, so have I.
I think everyone has. So I think that's the fun part. Is
I've gotten paid a lot of money to write code that if I looked at it now, I'd probably cringe.
Yeah. And then on the flip side, you've probably been paid a decent amount of money to deal with somebody else's mess.
Yeah.
That's
right now.
That's yeah. So that's something that I don't do a lot of anymore. I used to do like, people would hire me for, oh, you got this thing we need to get done, and we can't, like, our developer quit or whatever, and can you do it? And I'm like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Small fee, I can do that.
I'm sure it's a small fee.
Yeah, usually is.
Yeah.
It depends on who you are, but yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me, or like, what do you define as legacy code? I think this is a good starting point.
I think in theory, legacy code becomes legacy the minute it's production. When I think that's probably more of a smart-ass definition. I think it's accurate, but like when I hear legacy code base, I think in my mind I normally put some sort of time frame on it, something that's more than X number of years old, or something that maybe was written in PHP 5.2, or an older version of PHP, or whatever language that you're using. Generally, like, or stuff that when I look at it immediately, I don't understand. Like, I look at that and I go, okay. And it's typically not newer code, right? We got all these newfangled frameworks and stuff. And generally speaking, after a relatively short amount of time, you can kind of look at those and see what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like at work, I've got a project now that I've been working on kind of since I started. That's 3 years old, not done yet. Written in a very 2006 kind of way, where you don't really have routes in the traditional sense. It's kind of all individual PHP files, and nothing's really organized. There's a includes folder that has stuff in it, and then there's a PHP or /PHP /includes folder that has more stuff in it. There's a God class.
Oh, you have to have one of those.
I mean, if you don't, you're not doing it right. I mean, just kind of stuff like that. Things are just kind of all over the place. There wasn't really a whole lot of thought given to the architecture of it. It was written by a contractor that the company I work for now, had hired a couple years back. And it's just kind of generally a mess. Like, security was given no consideration whatsoever. Like, there was a whole administrative section that was basically security through obscurity. Like,
no one will guess these URLs, so
right. The chances of someone guessing admin.php are pretty low.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that was, I went a little bit more into a story there, but I guess that's kind of, when I think of legacy applications or legacy code, I think of things like that, things that are that just make you go, why?
Yeah. I think that's fair. So I shared the little smartass answer for what legacy code is anything you've pushed to production is now legacy code.
Right.
Just from the standpoint that, if you look at it, or if you really think about it, code that is legacy is any code that someone else is expecting to behave in a certain way. So like, once it's out there, it's like, it has to continue behaving that way, or you have to update the, client that's using it.
Right.
Like, that's when the whole, is this legacy or not comes into play. But yeah, I did for one of my talks, I did a bunch of, poking around and figuring out what people define as legacy code, just to kind of get an idea of what people think. And
Sure.
I think some of my favorites, out of just looking at them, one of them was any code that you've inherited from someone else, probably someone who wrote it a very long time ago. So I think that was kind of funny, because it often feels like that, if, especially, I don't know like how stickler some people are for things, but you get code that someone else wrote and you're like, man, I would not have written it this way. This is obviously, legacy, because it's not something that I agree with the way it's implemented, or I agree with, the choices they made. So this is what I consider legacy code.
Right.
So that was one that I found interesting. Just any code that someone else wrote that you now have to maintain, is people feel like that's what legacy code is. It's something that they have to deal with that they didn't write and they don't like.
Okay.
Another one was any code that you find that is running or working, it's like in production, or it's doing something and you can't decipher how it's working or why it's working. That's legacy code.
Okay.
That one was pretty good. I liked that one.
That one is good. I like that.
The kind of classic, or the textbook definition, I think, is code that's written for a language or a framework version, or uses tooling that's one or more generations behind the current. So I think you touched on this a little bit, where you've got something that's written and targeted, PHP 5.2, and like it only works it won't work in newer versions. Like that's legacy code, or it's using an ancient library or something like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
anytime that's what is considered like legacy code to a lot of people. So, and of course, examples range, run the gamut in terms of, we're using like ancient technology for, Windows applications and stuff like that, or whether it's old PHP versions or old Ruby versions or old Rails versions or whatever, like old framework versions of whatever you
Mm-hmm.
use. So like that's kind of, I think, the textbook definition.
I agree.
Personally, I like to use the definition of, what I consider legacy code is any code that is resistant to testing. And the characteristics that you'll see is any code that is difficult to change without impacting other things. Any code that's not structured at all. So you've got this huge, and I don't mean there's no control structures in there. I mean it's just like someone vomited code into a script and said, here you go, like this is into a file, like here's my code. So unstructured code, and then it's likely going to be incomprehensible. So it's something that
Right.
again, that's that whole, I'm reading this and I think I know what it does, but it doesn't make any sense. That's what I consider any code that is difficult to change. I can't discern like a legitimate structure to it, or I can't figure out what it's doing. That is my definition of legacy code, and that's something that I will fix almost immediately.
That's fair. I think. No, I mean I agree. I don't disagree. I think. I mean it's interesting that you point out testing with it. I've got a couple projects at work now that don't have any tests.
Mm-hmm.
That are difficult to work with, and as I look through, and I can clearly see areas, especially the one I referred to before, where there is some refactoring that's necessary. But it's funny how much more hesitant you are to change things when you really don't. Like when you don't have that safety net, when you don't have the kind of the expectations tested out as to how it works. And I mean, I agree. I think you put into words better what how I think of legacy applications as well. I mean, pretty much to me, like you said, anything that doesn't have tests, to me, like automatically becomes legacy code, because there's that initial jolt, I guess, when you start looking at it, and you kind of look around and you go, yeah, I don't know how this works. Or I do, and it's actually more frightening than not knowing how it works. Yeah. So I mean, I guess I was basically just telling you that you did a good job explaining that, because you touched on some things that I agree with that didn't come to mind immediately when I was defining it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, no, I think that's like the whole, I don't want to touch code that doesn't have tests. I mean, obviously I would much prefer everything to have tests, and I'd much prefer everything to have like a very comprehensive test suite, because that obviously is the safest and most reassuring environment to be in. But I will take any day code that has a clearly defined structure, and I kind of understand that things are where I expect them to be and to work how I expect them to work, over code that is unstructured but has some sort of tests. Just because I've been burned way too many times by, it's entirely possible to write a whole bunch of tests that are useless, and that kind of mask problems, and so you get the false sense of security that, oh, I've got all these tests. I've got a test suite of 1,000 different test cases, and they all pass. So obviously I'm protected. And it's like that's not really how it works. It depends on what you're testing and how you're testing it.
Right.
So I tend to look towards, or I tend to look more on the, is it comprehensible side, and then like I was saying, like the whole test resistant stuff. If you have code that is difficult to change or is not comprehensible, or it doesn't have structure, it's going to be hard to test it.
Right.
And you brought up kind of when you were describing your most recent
Project.
code base, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I work with one of those every day. It's kind of funny because I've tried many times to be like, I'm just going to go and refactor. Like the biggest problem that it has is, and then I've seen this in tons of code bases, so it's not unique to this one, but the actual legitimate God class.
Yeah.
I've tried several times over the past few years. Like, I'd be like, I'm just going to take a week or 2 weeks or whatever, and I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to put some wedges between this and take this God class and kind of extract it over here and break it up into its proper components and use it correctly. And it never works out. Like it always becomes a huge time suck.
Mm-hmm.
They've been so ingrained that it's legitimately easier to just blow it away, or to either blow it away or to maintain it, than it is to try to pull it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that's one of the most frustrating things, because up to when I started on this particular project, up to then I had encountered several code bases that I inherited from various places, and I was able to nurse them back to health and kind of just fix some of these problems, because it didn't have such fundamentally flawed problems.
Mm-hmm.
And this one kind of broke me from a, I felt like that was my thing, right? Like I felt like, oh, I was the person that came on to companies when they had code bases that were kind of difficult to manage, and worked with teams and figured out ways to break them down, got them started on the path, and then moved on. And that's kind of the pattern that I did for a couple of years. And so I thought that was going to be my, that's my thing, but it turns out that's not my thing, at least not with this particular code base.
Right.
But it's fun because it's something that I feel like is, it definitely keeps my job interesting. Just uncovering some of these problems and dealing with them occasionally I'm not going to say it's fun, but to me, it's a lot more fun than just a solid greenfield project where I can just sit down and do whatever I want.
Right.
And like that's, I think someone put this very well. A few weeks ago, I saw someone that tweeted something along the lines of, a project's first couple years are when you do all the, the crud stuff, all the really boring stuff. Like once you get past the 2 to 3 year mark, that's when you start actually building real business logic.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, that's true. Like as much as I would, as much as the DDDist side of me, or the, that
Just
side of the modeling.
DDDist?
Yeah. Domain driven designist. As much as that side of me wants to believe that you can sit down and just, start on a project and like get into the real meat and the core of it. I've never been able to really do that. But so I feel like it is, true a lot in this industry where, an application that's 3 years old, 4 years old, that's when you start really getting to the bulk of the problems that have to actually be solved. You've gotten past the, stage where you're just kind of flinging solutions together, like, winging it, and just like, oh, we can, mash this together and it's fine. And, nothing deals with this right now, so we can just kind of do it, to having actual problems that you need to solve. And so I think that's like where I'm most interested in being right now. So.
Okay. Yeah. So like with the project that I had referred to earlier, it was, it's pretty interesting because, like, the one class handles everything. Like legitimately everything. Random SQL queries are made because that object happens to have, a database. Have you ever heard of ADODB?
I have. I have heard of that.
Yeah, that's what it's using. That's what I had to move to because some of it was using that, some of it was using the MySQL extension. Obviously not validating any inputs.
Man,
Um,
that's ancient.
yeah,
Isn't it called like a database? No, I don't remember. I
I
forget what
don't
it's
remember
called.
what it's called,
Whatever.
but it's terrible. And so it does it does all that stuff and all the things that you would kind of expect to happen in that God class because it's a God class actually don't. It'll do some things and return some JSON, and then you'll find another instance of it somewhere else in the code base where it's just executing a random query. Um, and so I kind of hit that point too where I was looking at it going, oh, okay, I can fix this, and I think I had that thought and that plan in my head for about an hour, where I was like, I can fix this. And then as I kind of just kept digging and kept digging and kept digging, like I realized to fix this in its current state would probably take at least another year, right? And this is for a project that we have internally that it's like a sales tool. We do a lot of I've kind of talked about what we do as a company before, but a lot of our sales and stuff are kind of based on geographical areas. So we use Google Maps. We had hired a hungry guy, a Hungarian. Sorry, that was bad, huh? To kind of come in and do the JavaScript aspect of that and do all the front end mappy type stuff. Long story short, we got to a point where I did kind of determine that it would be easier because we have some functionality and some data that'll be in that project that we'll be able to use in other places, our website, and other kind of client facing applications that have yet to be defined. And so instead of doing that, we decided we were going to basically just write an API, take all the data. We're going to restructure the database structure was going to be different because it's pretty insane now. It's like one of those tables where whenever you want to add a field, like it's got like 70 fields in it now or something. And every time, you add a dumpster size or something like that, like you have to add 7 more fields to kind of handle it.
Sweet.
Yeah, so we're gonna obviously change the way that works, but we kind of determined like the best way to fix this is to do an API. We can finish the project that we're working on with it, and then we can kind of work on implementing, using that data on the website. Because like right now for the prices, I think we update them in 4 or 5 different places, like in our ERP system. They're doing it in this system that we're working on now just to make sure they don't get out of date. They're doing it on our website. They're doing it in a spreadsheet that all the salespeople use to actually look up prices. And the spreadsheets, I mean, it's one of those spreadsheets to kind of end all spreadsheets. It's a behemoth, and they have 4 copies of it because it's on a shared drive, and not everybody can have it open all at the same time. One of those types of things. So they have 4 different copies of that they have to keep straight. It's pretty amazing, actually. Like I tip my cap to the salespeople and to the operations people and billing people. Like I've looked at it and I literally can't even. But yeah, so we're gonna go the API route. Try to consolidate, the number of places that people have to actually update prices and data and all that kind of stuff. So it should be a really fun project. The biggest issue, obviously, is getting the data, right? Getting all the And the funny thing is, this project is going to have data fields that right now the ERP doesn't currently have. So when we're doing the data export to get all that stuff set up, they can pull about half of the stuff that we need out of the ERP, and then like the other fields that just kind of exist that are important for this project, but not important enough for the ERP, are have to be added by hand. So we've got a couple thousand providers that we use for dumpsters, and they basically all the pricing data has to kind of be checked and modified and entered by hand. So I don't know if I made the right choice in terms of picking an API, rather than just kind of refactoring everything that's there, picking a framework. I've been doing some Laravel stuff lately, so not going to use that. I'm going to start a fight. I deleted probably 15 tweets today. I'm like, I'm going to start a fight, but yeah. So it's just kind of, it's one of those situations, and I think that's one of the challenges, right? Is when you get to that point and you're like, okay, clearly the way that this isn't going to work. We want to live with this for the least amount of time possible.
Mm-hmm.
But what do we do? And like in our case, in a way, it is kind of a tearing, just completely scrapping the original idea and moving on to something else. But it's kind of with the caveat that they spent a lot of money getting it to the point that it's at now. Most of the hangups that we have now are just based around data. So we feel like they're, it's just obviously a long process to go in and do all that by hand. And then to keep it updated. But it's kind of a tear down. When we do the front end, we'll probably do something like Angular or React or something. And then just have the whole entire thing be API driven. And it'll be, it's going to be a pretty vital system to, our day-to-day operations. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge, to figure out what do I do, like, especially when it's so clearly obvious that keeping things the way they are is not a long-term solution.
Yeah. Which, yeah, I think that's always the fun part is, making the choice. And, or I guess for me, we're kind of following a similar path where I work, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's always I think the fun part is looking at, what is the product right now, or what does it do? What are its problems? Why can't we do what we need to do? And then how can we get there? And it's funny how, like the trend now is the whole, API thing, right? Like that's kind of, a lot of people are going that route.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it makes a lot of sense for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah.
It's, I think the biggest one for me, and kind of one of the reasons we're doing this, is it opens the door for being able to use, the data that you have, or the resources that you're able to build up. It kind of opens the door to use those in ways that you hadn't thought of before. And like, I think that's one of the biggest problems with dealing with legacy code is you're looking at something, and you always have to remember when you're looking and judging code, or judging, an application that's been around for 5 years.
Right.
Like when it was written, it was probably written with, the best intentions, and possibly was written over, several years. These changes happened, and
Right.
it supported a very narrow use case at the time, most likely. I mean, this is,
Yeah. No, that's probably
time and
fair,
time again, you see like, oh, well, we want to use a system like this, or we've got this one client that needs this special thing, so we're going to put this in here. And you end up just over time, it builds and builds and builds. And you end up with this behemoth. And then, you get the person who comes in, 6 years later and says, well, who built this? Like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Let's build an API. And at that point, at that point, it's when that person, in 2 years, they're going to be sitting there going, one of two things. They're either going to be, hey, this was the best thing I've ever done, or they're going to be like, why did I ever decide to stick my foot in this? Because, this is really a terrible, terrible situation to be in. Because if you think about it, accumulated code or like accumulated features in a large application,
Mm-hmm.
trying to take that and then replicate it into an API or breaking things down, it's a very difficult process. Like it's not something that you're going to overnight be able to take and turn an existing application with a whole bunch of stuff into an API that supports that application's features. Like you're effectively decomposing an entire system, and it takes a certain craft. And I'm actually giving a tutorial at ZenCon about this. So I'm kind of plugging my own thing, but it's taking a
Classy.
large take. I know, I do what I can. So you should be there. It's October 19th, I think. Anyway, it's in Vegas. ZenCon.com. No,
Oh my goodness, going off the rails.
no. So, but
See what I
like
did there?
the whole process of, yeah, I do see what you did there. The whole process of taking, an application that's working and decomposing it, turning it into an API. There are certain lines that you're going to have to draw, and there's certain, like, you have to understand concepts, and depending on your team and depending on the situation, in my case, we're doing this right now with an application where the majority of people who are working on it and working with it and making the changes to it have no idea why it is the way it is. Like they weren't around when the decisions were made. Like it's a lot of spelunking to figure out why or how something works. It's just it's a mess. So you're gonna find yourself working this legacy code base, and it's very obvious to someone who comes into a mess to say this is a mess. And it's very easy to say we should take this mess and turn it into APIs. But you are getting yourself into a lot of work. And I'm not trying to discourage you from doing it. I'm just telling you that you have to be realistic.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it.
You have to be realistic and understand that, yeah, it's very easy to make decisions, or it's very easy to say, well, let's just ignore half of these features and build this API. Like we don't need to support all these things. And you may not need to as a business, but it's not really I'd say like 9 out of 10 times, it's not a technical limitation that means that is the thing that cuts features. It is a joint business decision where you say, this to implement this in this new way, it's going to take us, this amount of time. So what is the benefit? Like, what is the cost benefit? So as the developer who's doing it, and, if you're a contractor coming in, good luck with this, but, as the person who's coming in to work on this, you have to keep in mind that a lot of times it's not just about what you want to do technically. It's about, how can you achieve this, health, or this, exercise of bringing an application from a mess to a clean place, or a place that's at least understandable. There's a lot of steps in there that aren't really just your decision to make.
Right. I think a lot of it too depends on the, obviously the complexity of the system. The funny thing about this thing that I'm working on is that it's really a pretty simple system. Like, basically a salesperson would go in and type in, I mean, from a, I say simple in terms of, in the different roles, like, so really what, I'll explain it. You can tell me if I'm full of shit. Basically, somebody would call on the phone. A salesperson would pick up the phone. They get the address for where they're gonna, where they need this dumpster. Right. The biggest challenge that we have is that we have, in a lot of areas, we have multiple providers that kind of overlap the same area. Right. So you'll have, you could get a dumpster from, vendor A or vendor B or vendor C or whatever. And obviously our goal is to get the customer the cheapest dumpster that we can, right? And so we have, we rank them basically in terms of price, or I don't know. I don't rank them. Somebody else ranks them. I just know that they're ranked, which is cool. But basically, they type in an address. It has the Google Maps does the location lookup. It'll kind of autocomplete the address and all that kind of stuff. It'll go over to the map. It'll drop a pin on that address, and then the part where it gets a little bit complex, and it's mostly on the front end, is we have geometry. So on the back end, on the admin side, they're able to draw service areas on the Google map. We save the geometry, so when they search that, it'll pull up all the providers that single point is able to be served by.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so from the salesperson standpoint, it's basically just like type an address, see what the ranks are, find the provider that has the and the rankings kind of change over time. Like if the primary hauler runs out of dumpsters, they'll go to the back of the line because they don't have any dumpsters, and we can't obviously ask them to deliver dumpster that they don't have.
Yeah, you can't throw your shit in a dumpster that doesn't exist.
Right. But then it's just basically a modal. They can kind of pick the size and what kind of debris and stuff goes in it, and the pricing is all right there. So from the salesperson standpoint, it's a really simple process. There's not a whole lot to it. As long as you get an address, you're pretty much good to go. And that was the main reason we decided to go with an API, is because it's really just representations of resources, right? We need to know all the vendor information. We need to know the pricing structures for that vendor, for that dumpster, for that waste type, for that size. And it's actually a very clean, at a high level, it's a very clean data structure. We don't have situations where, you have those. It was funny when you had mentioned, like, oh, well, this client needs something a little different. And my first thought was, yeah, those are generally always like in ginormous, like if blocks stuck in the middle of some sort of ginormous method somewhere. And it works. It's usually one of those cases where it works, but like, don't touch it. And so, yeah, I mean, we considered a lot of things. We considered trying to take it in the current state and break it out. And for the data structure that we have, and for the feature set that is currently defined, API kind of seemed like the cleanest route for us to go. I guess we'll see in time whether that's true or not, but it seemed like kind of the cleanest route to go. I do know that there are features that they'd like to have, things that would be helpful for them to have, but I think there's a good understanding of kind of the order that things need to go in, and we need to get the system up in its current state, with the data running, get all the kinks worked out. We need to kind of switch over the back end to the API, redo the front end, which again is a pretty small task in terms of the amount of pages and we'll call them views, that are in this application.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it's one of those things where you won't know that it was a shitty idea until it's too late to change course.
Yep.
Which is kind of typically how that works. So, yeah, no, it's fun. I mean, I really like it. Like, my coworker Justin had written a CMS for our website, and it's written in Laravel 4.2, I think. I don't know, whatever. I don't know. Laravel 4 something. We were kind of talking today, and he was like, yeah, I don't know that we're ever going to have the need, or B, ever have the time to actually upgrade this to Laravel 5. Because it's obviously it'd be a major version upgrade. The structure of things would have to change. It'd be more trouble than it's worth, and it's running our website, and it's good. It's working. It's doing what we need to do. The gains, performance-wise, we thought we would get, we've seen. So I was really encouraged by that, by the fact that he was like, "Hey, I wrote it on 4.2 because I started it a year ago, and that's what was out." And I don't know. I like that common sense there. Like, there's no need to kind of continually, at this point anyway, to kind of continually be messing with it. Like, let's get it up, let's get it running, let it do its thing, fix bugs when they come up, but for the most part, let's leave it alone. I think that shows restraint and maturity.
Yeah.
From a technology standpoint.
Or laziness. I'm just kidding. I'm joking. Yeah, no, I think that's...
I'm going to tell him you said that. He knows who you are.
That, we, probably a couple of years ago now, worked on a kind of a critical part of our systems, and it's sitting there running, and it's kind of running an out of date framework. Obviously,
Rails?
It is an older version of Rails, yes. But it's, it works, and it doesn't cause us any, trouble really, and it's not really hurting anything for it to be there. Like, obviously, the first opportunity I get, I'm probably going to go upgrade it. But it's not that, you need to upgrade something. And I think that's
not mission critical.
Yeah, I think that, and that's the important thing that I think people need to think about, or as developers, you need to think about. Like, yes, upgrading things is nice, and usually it buys some advantage to you as a developer. Like, there's been a situation recently where we could, by upgrading the version of the framework we're using, we could save ourselves some work. But the cost of doing the upgrade is going to be probably a couple weeks of just dealing with new dependencies, like dealing with all of that fun stuff, dealing with deploying it, getting it, making sure it's all functioning, like going through all this work where effectively, if you upgrade a framework on a mission critical application, you can't just like upgrade it and run a few browser tests and be like, I'm done.
Walk away, right?
Yeah, I mean, you rely on your unit test suite, or your test suite of whatever you have. You rely on that to get the upgrade, and that's some security. But at some point, for us, to put something that's especially customer facing, we're not going to just push something out that hasn't been kind of thoroughly vetted against the new versions.
Right.
So, I mean,
you can't afford to.
Yeah. Well, no. Yeah, you can't. Like, you could easily, and I mean, there's ways around this. Like, you can put it up in a smaller segment of your production traffics, like push it onto one of 8 systems or something like that. Like, I mean, there's ways to deal with this and get a decent volume of traffic going to it. But before I even get to that point, like before I get to the point where I want to put it in front of actual customers, I want to be sure that it's gone through like as thorough a vetting as it can. So, you look at that and you say, okay, I could spend, a week of, a developer's time hacking in the support, or, building up our own tooling to do this one feature that we would get. Or I can spend 2 weeks of 8 people's time to upgrade it. So you just have to weigh it at that point. So you have to think, yes, it's nice to use the latest and greatest of everything. And I highly encourage you to take every opportunity you can to upgrade, especially things like language versions, stuff like that. Like, to get that stuff done, that is important. But it's not the end of the world if you don't have the latest version of your framework or the latest version of some library. Like, if you're using, if you're not using the latest version of Guzzle, I mean, you're not going to die because you're not using the latest version. Like, yes, it has nice features, but it's
no, I know what you mean.
Yeah, So just
I
you have
think
to think about that stuff.
I think more. I mean, honestly, I think more importantly than feeling like you have to upgrade, or be on the latest version, is understanding. Like, I think, and this isn't true in all cases. I don't think anything is, but I feel like it's more valuable to really understand. I don't want to say the shortcomings, but I guess in some cases it is. A lot of updates, especially major version updates, do things differently. A lot of security things get updated in minor version updates, which theoretically you should be able to upgrade minor versions without breaking anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hence them being minor versions. Um, but it's still not something that you can do willy nilly.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say willy nilly. So it's I don't know. It's important to understand like the new features in PHP, right? Like when people went from way back in the day from PHP 4 to PHP 5, right? The entire object model changed
Mm-hmm.
and became an actual object model. And I remember. I mean, I worked most of the stuff that I started on when I was, I started in we're doing this professionally was in PHP 4, and there was that point where we upgraded to 5, and shit broke.
Yep.
I mean, that's why it's a major version and not a minor version. Like things are being done differently, different decisions are being made. Um, you know, it's important to understand what whatever framework or library or whatever you know piece of code that you're using that you didn't write, um, to know what it's doing and know what it's not doing, and understand that maybe something. And I think of frameworks in particular. There may be something that version 4 of, I'm just going to use Laravel because why not? Um, there may be things that you have to do kind of in the code in Laravel 4 that Laravel 5 handles a little bit more implicitly,
Yeah.
or fluidly, or however you want to say it. I mean, pretty much everything in Laravel is implicit, but
You just can't resist, can you?
I don't. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just
Yeah.
whatever. I'm not going to go into
Yeah.
my personal feelings on
No,
it,
that's
but
fine. That's good.
so those are the types of things you have to take into consideration. Like, there's a bunch of code that we have written that works and it does what it's supposed to do and it handles the shortcoming in 4, but in 5 we have to figure out how easy, how safe, how clean it is to pull that out, and it's usually a much bigger decision than 5 looks pretty cool. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I had a boss one time call me up. Ironically enough, it was on my birthday. This was well, I won't go into that, but he called me. It was a Saturday, my birthday. I thought he was calling to wish me happy birthday. Um, that wasn't the type of boss he was, but he said, what did he say? He said something like, "Hey, I'm gonna upgrade this server from like 5.3 to 5.4. Do you think anything is gonna break?"
Do you think anything's gonna break?
Yeah, and I was like, and I just woken up. I'm trying to like do the feature comparison from memory in my head as he has me on the phone, like telling me to hurry up. Um, and I didn't know, so I said, "Yeah, probably." And he was like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna do it anyway." And those were like his exact words. Um, and sure enough, a bunch of shit broke.
Yep.
Like, I don't know. It's just it's a very big conversation. It's a very big decision that you have to make, in my opinion, before you do something like that.
Yeah. Like so here's a little anecdote of something that I did in the past week. I upgraded one of our applications from a older version of Ruby 1.9.3 to 2.2.2. And then in the process, I upgraded the Rails version that application uses from 3.2.16 to 3.2.22. So this is just a point release, right? Like this
Catch up there, yeah.
There should be no problems.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as it
There
turns
was.
out, the 3.2.22 branch of or version of Rails, I don't know how much you know about Rails, but it has this thing called active support inside of it, or it
Mm-hmm.
uses this thing called active support, which that actually in the upgrade they took one of the dependencies out as a hard dependency. So now instead of implicitly getting it because you require Rails, you have to explicitly include it or
Okay.
explicitly require it.
Mm-hmm.
So it happened to be, in this case, a gem called test unit. And so I added it to the group of dependencies that are included when you're in development mode or when you're in testing mode,
Okay.
or when you have that environment.
Yep.
Well, turns out you can't do that. It actually needs to be available for all environments.
Mm.
Otherwise, you're not able to do things like use the console. It was actually causing problems in our production environments, like actually just restarting the server.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to deal with that today. I had to fix that. But so it is one of those things where it's theoretically it's a very light change. Like 3.2.22 supports the version of Ruby that I was upgrading to.
Mm-hmm.
That was the whole point of that release those couple releases around there was to add in support into that 3.2 line for the newer versions of Ruby.
Right.
But the upgrade, which should have been easy and
Mm-hmm.
should be pretty straightforward, which it was, it actually wasn't. There's a small little gotcha, which I personally would never think that I need to require a testing framework called test unit in my in every environment, regardless. Like I just wouldn't think that's something I need to do.
That makes sense. I wouldn't think that either.
But turns out you do. So that's just one of those things that when you're looking to upgrade something, and the reason we were doing it is 1.9.3 is kind of like the 5.1 probably. I guess it would be like a corollary of PHP.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe a little higher, but it's an old version. Like it's several years old. It's kind of out of date. No one's really patching it anymore. Like it's kind of you don't need to be using that anymore. So we wanted to upgrade the Ruby version, and then while we were doing it, figure might as well go up to a version of the framework which actually supports the version of Ruby that we're using, like has all the backported fixes and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a pretty frustrating ordeal, and that's just
Yep.
something to keep in mind, that it never goes like you expect it to. Um, I worked on upgrading from PHP 5.3 to 5.4 in one of our apps. I did a lot of work a while back to do
Okay.
it, but the system side, like the ops side, they had a lot of cleanup to do on their end because of how like we were compiling PHP and stuff was kind of convoluted, and so they wanted to clean all that up. So like the work that I did to get the system ready for, or get the application ready to work on 5.4 and 5.5 and 5.6 now, but
Mm-hmm.
it was done a long time before the actual application was deployed. So there was some additional I had to go back and kind of reevaluate everything at the time we actually upgraded it. So that's the other thing to consider is you can make an application ready to support versions, but depending on who owns your systems and how they work, like you may be doing a lot of work for no reason. So just you
Right.
just have to think about that stuff as a developer.
I agree. So I wanted to kind of transition if we could.
No.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Good night. No. Well, we're getting we're getting close to about an hour here. So I was going to ask you a question and then answer it for you. or at least give my opinion on it. So I'll just throw it out there. I won't actually formally ask it, so I don't seem like a jerk. But like and this is kind of getting away from the decision part of the conversation, more into the understanding part of the conversation, where you look at that code base and it's it's just it's hard to ascertain what's going on. Um, I have found that like a step through debugger, Xdebug in PHP, has saved me countless hours. I was curious from your standpoint if you had that same experience, or if you use a step through debugger currently, and B, if there was any other sort of tools like that can maybe kind of speed up the amount of time that it takes you to understand a code base or to understand an application.
Um, hmm. So, to answer part of the question, yes, I do use step debuggers,
Mm-hmm.
and they are absolutely invaluable for this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the main place I use them when I don't understand code is usually when I'm writing like a test for something. I'll use them at that point.
Okay.
I'm just kind of get into so like kind of I use tests, or I write. They don't have to be like actual unit tests, but like write something that is kind of my hypothesis of how it works.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like it's not necessarily a tool, but it's kind of a technique for dealing with code that's kind of weird to understand.
Okay.
Is I'll read it and kind of come up with what do I think this does, like, or how do I think this works. And so
Mm-hmm.
kind of write code that exercises it in that way. And
Okay.
hopefully this is in a unit test, but it could just be a script somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then I use a step debugger when I'm running that to just kind of look at, okay, so I said this and I expected this to happen, and this is what is actually going on. And like, here's the path that, this actually sets this way. And like, that has always helped me figure out weird problems, especially
Mm-hmm.
is, kind of getting to a point where I have my own hypothesis of what it does and how it does it. And then I get to verify that by using a tool that's kind of looking in the process of getting to the answer. I'm looking at what's going on. So yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the best tool, I guess, beyond step debuggers. I'm trying to think what I would actually use.
Do you like profiling or anything?
Not generally to figure out what code is doing. Like I think that's a different
But
problem.
no, it is. I'm just trying to think of the whole tool. So not like to understand what the code is doing and how the code flows and where things are being called from and all that kind of stuff, right? Is more of a step debugger type thing. But
Yeah.
to figure out, where things might be slow or where things might be inefficient.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you're looking at like transforming a code base, and I mean, tools like, even static analysis and things like, code climate, that sort of thing, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
give you some hints of hotspots or areas that, are complex. And, not to knock any particular tool, but, you have to take some of what is done via static analysis and, tools like that with a grain of salt. Because, sometimes it's not always, like, depending on how it's implemented, it's not always telling you actual factual or actionable information.
Okay.
But yeah, so I use that as kind of a general guideline to tell me, hey, you should probably look at this. So like, I'll look at things like cyclomatic complexity, and
Mm-hmm.
so like another technique for dealing with complicated code, or when you want to know like when something is becoming too complicated to understand, is looking at branches, like looking at, how many else statements do you have? Are you using else statements? Like, certain people have their opinions on whether you should ever use else statements or not, and there's ways around it, and dealing with guard clauses and stuff like that. So like just kind of
Right.
looking at what are the paths through this code that's a very good indicator that you should probably refactor it, because it's extremely difficult for, I would say for me anyway, it's extremely difficult to keep track of, two paths. Like, just really in complicated code, it's very difficult to keep track of two different paths and understand, okay, what is this
Sure.
doing? So you have to go through one at a time and kind of do that thing I was talking about, where this is what I expect to happen, this is what actually happened in this path or whatever, and just kind of
Mhm.
go from there.
I agree. I think, yeah, I mean, I think all those, generating, I mean, if you're fortunate enough to have tests or, yeah, definitely, code climate or something like scrutinizer, um, I think are good tools to kind of help, analyze the code. And I guess I look at it kind of from a standpoint of, am I going to be, am I burning this whole entire project down and starting over, or am I kind of rolling with what's there and trying to improve it? And I think that's where a lot of those, doing the profiling, kind of, doing the complexity analysis, doing the crap score and all that kind of stuff, can kind of help you, in some ways, figure out where to start. Like, especially if it's an application, that's live, or it's in production. If you've got, and that's why I mentioned profiling. Like, if you've got something in production and there's parts of it that are just slow, having that information allows you to be at least a little bit more strategic. At least, kind of where to start looking. Now, you may find yourself going down the rabbit hole anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is slow because of this, which is slow because of this, and sometimes there's just not a good way to do it. But I'm a big proponent of, um, collecting and analyzing as much data and as much information about what you're working with as possible. Because I think ultimately it helps, obviously make better informed decisions about kind of what you're going to do.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, if you have the tools and everything in place to kind of measure, especially you can use it for trend data. Like, to me, a one-time analysis is very not that interesting. I'm much more interested in like trends of things. So I'm much more interested in seeing, okay, this particular class is being touched, you know, every single ticket this particular iteration or whatever, right? Like, those kinds of things start telling me that there's problems in, design of code. So like, if everyone is working on, 5 different features and there's one particular class that's being modified every single time, that is a god class in the making.
Right.
Like, so like that is telling you, okay, if they're having if there's this much work being done here or in this particular module or this particular area, that's where you want to focus your attention on. Did we actually get this abstraction right, or did we actually deal with this problem in the correct way?
Right.
So like, that information is much more useful to me than just, oh, it looks like this code is duplicated. Like, I mean, yeah, I don't like a bunch of duplicated code, but there are
Mm-hmm.
certainly, and this is a point that I want to make on this is, yes, I push for tools like, static analysis and code climate and scrutinizer and that type of stuff. I push for them, but I don't think that you should become a slave to your code analysis tools.
I agree.
Like, there are always situations where, and so here's a fun example, right? Like, we were just joking about this today in our stand up, which I have to say to kind of trigger you. But we were in our stand up today. We were talking about the fact that there's a class that someone's working on. They're like, it's kind of complex, so I think I'm gonna do a little bit of refactoring work and kind of move some things around. And the main motivation for that is, code climate is mad. Code
Right.
climate's upset with this, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I don't think that you should try to appease a tool because
Are you talking about an actual tool or a person?
both. But just appeasing the code climate or whatever, like just saying, "Oh,
Right.
I'm going to fix this." The way to make code climate and tools like that happy is to
Uninstall them.
to either uninstall them or to break things down and kind of add a whole bunch of layers of indirection into your code, right? Like
Right.
if you want a very non-complicated class, or you want a score that says your complexity is very low, you would have very small classes with very small methods. The way you do that is by having everything be helper methods and kind of having, so you have this 18 deep call stack to solve this problem. And Code Climate's like, good job, you guys are excellent programmers. And you're like, well, thanks. But the person
Aw,
who's
code climate.
trying to maintain that is going to be frustrated because they can't figure out how anything works because it's distributed across the file system, right? Like
Right.
it's in 18 different classes and they're in different files, and there's you just like every time you look at something you've got to go one step deeper. So now you've got your step debugger and you're stepping through 18 files and you're trying to figure it out, and you're like, where you could just have one semi-complex method that kind of has it all, or two methods or whatever,
Right.
like, don't become a slave to whatever you're using to analyze things. Like, it's a tool to help you, it's a tool to show you where there are possible problems, but it's not something you have to sit down and appease. Like, you don't feel like you have to do that just because you're using a tool.
It's not SEO.
Yeah, exactly.
No, no, I totally agree. I think like all things in moderation. I don't think taking whether it's a tool or whether it's a strategic conversation or a challenge from a coworker, or, technical challenge from a coworker that they bring up to kind of either justify or dissuade you from doing something. I don't think you should let any one thing be the basis for a decision. But I do think obviously it's a little bit different when you start talking about like doing open source stuff versus like commercial or something that's going to make you money.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned it before, cost benefit analysis of how long the change is going to take. Is it going to how's it going to affect revenue before, during, and after, and doing all that kind of stuff. And sometimes like the answer is just leave it alone until there's a justifiable business reason to change it. And as programmers and technologists, for lack of a better word, that sucks, right? Because generally speaking, until you hit kind of a certain level of maybe like a lead or an architect, like you really aren't forced or required to think about the business implication of things very much. You're all about the technology. And that's a really fun place to be as a programmer, I think. Like that's like the world is your oyster in a sense. So you can play with any technology you want and learn a whole bunch of stuff on that side. But I mean, it is important to remember, if that's not you, in your organization now, there is somebody in your organization that has to make those calls and those decisions. So, yeah, definitely agree with you 100% there. Don't let, like, really the only thing you should be paying attention to and really reacting to, in my opinion, is builds. Like, if you're whatever you're using, if you're using Jenkins or I don't know, I use Fing with some shell scripts and stuff to just do deploys and stuff and builds. But like that'll indicate more that you need to do something immediately, and analysis tools, and I mean, even things like I've seen things like even with style checking. Like, ideally, everything would be compliant with whatever coding standard you decide to use. chances are, especially if it's an older code base, it's not. And kind of going through and spending a whole bunch of time doing that when there's other business things that are going to make you money to do,
Yeah.
isn't going to be probably the best use of your time, and giving your employer the best value for your time.
Yep.
So it's just that it's finding that balance of like it almost kind of sounds like, well, okay, basically we're never going to get to upgrade any tools. The code's going to remain as shitty as it is now. It'll never get better, and that's not. Hopefully, that's not the impression that we've given. That's certainly not the impression I've tried to give. But you have to understand, there's a reaction on the business side for every decision that you make on the technology side.
Yeah.
And you just have to make sure that it's in balance. So it's almost more of a word of encouragement to people who aren't involved in those business decision meetings and conversations to understand that they hired you because you're a good programmer. There's a pretty good chance that the higher ups all throughout the business don't know as much about how everything works as you do or as you will. But just because they don't have a grasp on that, on the finite details of the technology, they're there for the business side. They're there to make sure that the salary that they're paying you is helping them make more money. And so just an encouragement, like it's easy to get frustrated. But if you're working at a company that's still in business, there's a pretty good chance someone there's making decent business decisions. So
hopefully, or you're funded
right.
and
Well,
you
if you're
haven't quite
funded,
figured out a way to monetize your business. And
yeah, which I won't go there, but use the word business there loosely. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I went off on a little bit of a rant there about that, but I mean, I guess, and I'll ask you here because I've been talking for like 17 minutes straight, but I mean, I would say like what I hope people got out of this conversation and out of us kind of going through our experiences and strategies and decision making process is that improving or optimizing or upgrading or whatever you're doing to a legacy system to kind of make it more maintainable and make it easier to work with and improve on and add features to. It's definitely attainable. It's not easy. It's not something that you can kind of just coast through, but it is a process that's in play. Like I won't say a process. It's a if you kind of take your time in the early parts, right, and come up with the strategy and the business value and all that stuff, an understanding of why you're doing what you're doing or why you want to do what you want to do, it can be a very attainable thing. It's hard and it's difficult, and depending on I guess a lot of different factors, it may go relatively fast, and it may be an absolute nightmare, but you can still do it.
yeah.
So I didn't want this to be discouraging. I feel like, and not that we were intentionally being discouraging, but it is difficult. Like I don't want to make it sound like it's not. But if you're smart and you're deliberate and you think through it, more times than not, you can make good decisions that at least boost the boost some good characteristics of the crufty code base that you're working with.
Yeah, and it's worth it, right? Like it's going to be worth it. And I think that's that's another thing that I wanted to say. Like, the whole business thing, right? Like the whole, it's ultimately a business decision, effectively whether you're going to be able to make the change or, ultimately it needs to be something that is weighed against or weighed for the business value that it provides.
Mm-hmm.
But there's another side to that where, as the developer or as the, developers or whatever, your job is to look out for the future and the health of the application, right? Like it's your job to understand that no, you can't just go and willy-nilly add all these. See, I used it for you too.
There you go. Good job.
But you can't
That's a
just
word.
add a whole bunch of stuff into here just because you can. Like there's a point where you have to learn, and I've talked about this before, but you have to learn the benefit of saying no, right? Like you have to learn the benefit of saying, we have gone too far. Like this, doing this is going to take us one step too far on the technical debt side, or it's going to put us into a position where this is going to be something that we can't actually fix. So I think it's important that there's a certain yield to the business. Like there's definitely an amount, at least a yield of decision making power or whatever to the business side, but
Mm-hmm.
there's also a responsibility as as a developer to really understand what those changes are going to do to your application.
Yeah.
You have to do your homework there too. So I think that's kind of the last point that I wanted to make was there's business value and then there's technical value, and you have to figure out the balance between them, and that's
Right.
something that only you can do. Like you can't expect your CEO or your lead sales representative, you can't expect them to truly understand. I mean, maybe they do, but it's not really their responsibility to truly understand that adding this if statement in the middle of um, this particular code is going to affect something longer term. Like they don't always understand. Like to them, it's just, I've got this one contract that I'm trying to negotiate here. They said they would sign it if we do this. So why
Mm-hmm.
can't we just let the system do that for them?
Right.
So it's your job to explain that, and it's your job to make sure that that's heard, whether it's to your manager who then talks to them or whatever, like however that
Right.
works. But in your company,
Whatever your chain of command is.
yeah. But it's your job to look out for that stuff and be able to bring it up when you need to.
I agree.
Well, cool. So I think that's kind of a good overview of some basic legacy code base experiences.
Yeah, I would say if there's experiences that you've had that maybe we didn't touch on or didn't touch on in a lot of detail, uh, send us some tweets. If we need to. I mean, I feel like we did a decent job of kind of covering everything. But yeah, if you've got some experiences or even just a funny story, if it's funny enough, maybe we'll talk about it next time. It's got to be really funny though. I don't make bad jokes. Like we need legit funny stories here.
Yeah,
Um,
like knee slap funny.
yeah, like so funny that Jeff would even laugh.
Yeah, like dad joke funny.
Absolutely, because Jeff never laughs at my jokes because they're like too funny. Like they're so funny that he doesn't even the laughter doesn't even come to him.
They're like funny on a whole different dimension.
On a different plane.
Yeah,
I
there
think
you go.
even a plane of humor that's not known to most men. But yeah, definitely give us your feedback, your tweets, your thoughts on kind of how we covered it, because it's one of those few topics that I guess maybe not few, but it's one of the topics that kind of everybody at some point is going to deal with, whether you're a junior or a senior. Like at some point, you're going to be involved in that process, and I don't know. I'm curious to hear what other people have gone through, or what other people do.
Yeah.
And read Paul's book because it's actually good.
Yeah, it's actually good, surprisingly. Anyway, all right. Definitely read Paul's book if you're working in PHP and trying to modernize legacy code. You should do that. There's also another book, Working Effectively with Legacy Code, by Michael Feathers, which you should check out. It's a pretty good one. He's kind of got it's applicable beyond just, or it's not just focus on PHP.
So it's more of a higher level strategy type thing.
Yeah. I mean, the examples are all in Java, so take that for what it's worth. But it's kind of like I would call it more of the textbook side, and then
Okay.
Paul's is
Paul's
more
more
of like
practical.
like the field guide. I don't know, like if you want to call it that, but I mean that's what I'm going to call it. So you should check out those 2 books if you're into this kind of stuff. So, all right, cool. Well, that is episode 28 of the Loosely Coupled podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Later.